Welcome to Monet Cafe and to my patrons on my Patreon page. I'm sharing this video in two formats to both groups. I hope you enjoy this very interesting new way to paint with pastels. Some people may have tried this before, but I'd never done it this way before. I'm literally using the pastels almost like little watercolor palettes. But first, let me give you a little tour of my backyard for my subject matter. I recently did a video, which I will share with you guys, on the Fibonacci sequence, also called the golden ratio, and how all of nature permeates this beautiful order, sequence, and design. And when we learn these things, it only helps our art get better. So please be sure to see that video. And now just enjoy this simple little tour in my backyard while I talk to you guys a little bit. I wanted to make sure, I often don't say, please subscribe, like this video, and share comments. It really does help my standing with YouTube. And also, I'm going to be asking some questions during the video, so I hope you guys will answer. That's how this channel gets better, is because of you. You guys have shared with me that you like my recent format of laying my paintings out flat so you guys can see better and see my supplies. I will be giving a full supply list in this video, so I want you to join in on the fun. Monet Cafe will get a version that's a little bit shorter. My patrons will get the full version, and they will also, this is part of their homework assignment. So this video has a lot of content, but I think it should be very easy to follow. I think I missed my calling as a nature photographer. Has anyone ever done this with a little bloom? These are crepe myrtles in my backyard. Whee! All right, let's get started. Okay, here we go with the supplies. You basically need a piece of watercolor paper. I have one of these watercolor blocks. It's made by Canson. It's the Arches block. And I love this because the edges are already kind of glued around the edges, and it keeps the paper from buckling a little. But I also like the real textured surface here. Now you could just use any kind of watercolor paper. I thought I'd show you my little watercolor tablet here, or pad, where I have used it to actually do pastel paintings. Yes, you can do pastel paintings on watercolor. I did not coat any of these with clear gesso that I often talk about to make a surface for pastel. These were literally just done with mostly new pastels made by Prismacolor. They're harder pastels and they can work on watercolor just fine. So I find this kind of a fun and neat little way to sketch. I don't even put any glassine or tracing paper in between them. Probably would be a good idea to do that, but I find if they just, you know, touch the other paper, they still look pretty much like they did when I painted them. Oh, that's my little Oreo in the backyard. I love her. She's my heart. So anyway, you can use watercolor paper with pastels. And now in this video, I'll share how you can use pastels to paint on watercolor paper. So this is just a charcoal sketch. Some of these things are just really experimentation, and that's what Monet Cafe is all about, having fun. These are just some little color studies I did of a little waterway with some trees. And we want to experiment, we want to have fun, and then often we discover new ways to do things. What I am going to share with you today, using pastels like watercolor, I will definitely use again. I absolutely had a blast doing this. And I want to share as well that you don't have to use watercolor paper. If you use any pastel paper that's water friendly, such as the UArt paper I just showed, and also pastel matte paper is also water friendly. And the white surface, the pastel matte white, works great with regular watercolor. So I'm sure it would work great with this technique as well. In this lesson, I used primarily the Derwent Inktense blocks. These are great for doing underpaintings, and they are, Inktense is the name because they're intense with color, and that's one of the reasons that I thought this would be a great type of pastel for using this technique, and indeed it was. Regular soft pastels, I haven't really done much of that with this watercolor technique, but these are literally almost like a little watercolor palette. Watercolors and pastels are really the same thing, just combined differently and in a little bit of a different format. So I also recommend using Neocolor wax pastels for this technique. You can literally pick these up and just paint with them with a brush and use them like watercolors, just like the Inktense blocks. So I'll be using a combination of both of these. I didn't use any regular soft pastels for this example. Now, you could also do the same thing with new pastels, harder new pastels. They work well. They're not quite as intense and bold in color as the Inktense blocks. You can kind of tell it from looking at the video. Those are really bright and bold with color, and they're a lot of fun. And also keep in mind you can use regular watercolor in conjunction with the pastels because they are both made of similar substances. They work great together. And the goal is just to have fun, have some painting freedom time, and don't keep yourself so much in a box that you can't play. And now, of course, you're going to need some brushes. I have a pretty decent set of some brushes that I like, but you can use whatever you have. I use a lot of cheap brushes as well. Okay, so other than the brushes, you're also going to need a ruler, but that's only if you're doing the first part of this, which is, I'm going to speed it up a little bit. It's a part of the Fibonacci sequence exercise, but you can skip past that and don't even have to do that. You'll need some water, obviously, and I like these little micron markers. They're little black, look like little black felt tip markers, but they're great for using with water because they don't bleed and they don't smear. So you don't have to have those for this exercise, but I use them at the end and for this part. Now, let me describe what I'm doing here. This is part of the homework assignment for my patrons, and I'm encouraging them to get outdoors, check out the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio in nature. You'll see later where I actually bring some of my plants inside that I used to inspire me for this painting. But what I'm doing is I've marked off 1-inch squares all the way around the whole side. So everything, by the time I'm done with this pencil, will be a whole piece of watercolor paper with little 1-inch squares, and then I'm going to draw in the golden ratio spiral that is really pretty common. I think most artists have seen it, but I don't know if many artists have actually drawn it. So I thought it would be neat to have the golden spiral as an underlaying as part of the painting itself. So you don't have to do that part. It's kind of an exercise in just understanding these principles. So I'm going to really fast forward through this. And for those of you in Monet Cafe or subscribers to Monet Cafe, you can just do the regular painting without this underlying golden spiral that will be kind of combined with the painting. Okay, this is Patreon only content where I'm going to show you how to do the golden spiral. Once again, if you saw the Fibonacci sequence video, it will help you. Go back and watch that before doing this. And it's called the golden ratio or golden spiral. So I'm going to show you how to do it. I thought it would be fun to combine the golden spiral in a painting. Basically, you start with the first two numbers, 0 and 1. You add those together and you get 1. Then you add the previous two numbers, 1 and 1, you get 2. Add 2 and 1, you get 3. Add 3 and 2, you get 5, and so on and so on and so on. So that's how we calculate the numbers for what I'm about to do next. Okay, so we are going to do a golden spiral that's going to be a part of our painting. All right, so what I've done is I've divided off my watercolor paper 1 by 1-inch squares. That was the most tedious part about this. The rest is not too hard. So what do? We start with the numbers. 0, well, I can't do 0, right? The next two numbers are 1 and 1. I'm going to count up just so you know where to put this. You got to be careful where you put it. 7 inches up, okay? So I'm using this little micron marker I talked about. You can use whatever you want. You can just do it in pencil if you want. I am going to be erasing these pencil marks too. So I'm doing 1, that's the quantity of 1, and another 1. Remember, it went 0, can't do a 0, 1, and 1. So there we've got our 1 and 1. Now we need to do 3, which was the next, we need to do 2, which was the next number in the sequence. So there's a square of 2 by 2. Yep, now we need to do 3 that I pointed at. So see how I went over 3 blocks? So now we have a 3 by 3 square. What's the next one? 5. We're going to go down 5 inches, basically, or 5 blocks for a 5 by 5 square. What's the next one? 8. This is why you have to be careful about where you start, because you could just run off the page, okay? So I'm doing an 8 by 8 square, and then I can't even finish the next one because it goes off the page, but that's okay. It's just kind of giving you an idea. So again, I thought this would be a fun way to learn it. Now all you do with this is you go from corner to corner of the square. You could use a compass if you wanted. I just thought I'd freehand it, kind of wish I had used a compass, but it's okay. So I just continued on with this spiral, corner to corner, all the way around. Now, here's where I'm erasing it. You don't have to watch this whole part. All right, I didn't even worry about erasing it great, but time for a sip of coffee. And then what I did, I literally went outside, and this is what I want you guys to do, patrons. I want you to explore your world. Look for the Fibonacci sequence in nature. I found a lot of flowers that had petals of 3 and 5, and many things in the stems represented the Fibonacci sequence. You could see it in how the leaves grow on these sunflowers. I decided just to use the sunflowers even though I brought in a whole lot of other plants, but it was really kind of fun. And here are some of the other flowers I brought in, just because they're pretty. But I did a few different types of sunflowers where one of them is kind of at the end of its growth cycle. And so I just literally, you can see to the right there, I just laid some of the sunflowers around me to get inspired. All right, so now all I'm going to do is use this brush. I used one of my larger brushes here, and because I'm doing the largest sunflower, and I've got my Inktense blocks. Now you may not have Inktense blocks, that's why I gave you other options of what to use. You might want to try them with just regular pastels. You may want to do this with watercolor or whatever. The point is, get outside, look for the Fibonacci sequence, and try to draw a golden spiral. And you can just draw a bunch of cute little flowers around it if you want to. Whatever you want to do. You can do it in pastel if you want. Again, the main part of the lesson is to explore your surroundings, look for the Fibonacci sequence, and try to create a golden spiral with some fun paintings beside it. All right, but if you want to try to do this watercolor one, I like, or pastels that behave like watercolor, I am literally just painting on the pastel. Later I end up lifting them up, you'll see, so that the water doesn't kind of drip down behind them. You'll see me now. I want to describe something that I like about this paper. This Arches paper is really textured, and when you apply it, it already gives kind of a painterly feel if you kind of have your brush not so saturated with water. And this was not a wet on wet technique. I think it's so fun. We're using pastels like watercolor. But I also realized if you haven't done much painting with water like this, or watercolor painting, one of the hardest things I had to learn about watercolor painting was learning to paint, or the water is your friend. Don't be afraid to use a lot of water, because your painting's going to look really tight if you don't. Now I did kind of want to not have this center part too watery just yet, but the reason I've got my you can see over to the left, my little watercolor palette there, is I'm using the little palette tray to mix my Inktense pastels. So, and also too, I noticed in the Inktense pastels thing, you can use those little holders that are on either side. You can see them, they held water just fine, and so I used those kind of as my little palette. Now this is a yellow one that I actually ended up kind of getting too wet. That's why later I decided to kind of lift them up and not put quite so much water on them. It was still fine. It ended up being fine. But I'm using this and adding a lot of water to this over to the left where you can't see in my little watercolor palette. I'm getting a little bit more of that bolder color there. So pretty soon I'm going to start painting. I will speed this up a little bit because, like I said, the goal is to get outside, check out the order in nature and that golden sequence that's in so much of plant life, and create a golden spiral. You don't even have to do it with the ruler method. I usually do it just freehand, so do it however you want. Now, what I'm doing here is I've got my brush. I'm going to zoom in and show you this a little better. What I do is I come out just kind of thin from the flower, and then I press the brush to get a thicker petal. I like to keep a little bit of air in there next to the center part of the flower, because otherwise your flowers end up looking all smushed together, and later you can go in and add some of those petals that are behind. That one I smushed a little too fast, but I noticed that that one was kind of smushed together when I looked over where the sunflower was laying down. So, but just keep in mind that sometimes it's good to leave a little space, keep a little thin line, and I'm looking at the sunflower, how it's laying down, so I'm kind of trying to recreate that one. But see how I flatten the brush to get the petals wider? All right, I'm going to speed this up a little bit now so you can you get the idea. Now, notice that I get my general petals in, and then after I get all the way around, and once again, I'm trying to avoid monotony or every petal being the same or the same distance apart, so I'm turning them this way and that way. But after I get that first kind of layer in the forefront of petals, I go in, see how I'm doing that, and kind of add little hints of kind of a secondary layer behind it. Now I'm just grabbing the paper's pretty wet. Like I said, don't be afraid to use a decent amount of water when you're using watercolor, especially if you've got a good watercolor paper, because it really does lend towards that painterly effect. And also keep in mind that watercolor, I'm keep saying watercolor even though I'm working with pastel, because it's going to behave very much like watercolor. You're not going to be able to get the lights back again. You want to preserve the luminosity. So if you want those petals to look light and airy like they do now, you don't want to get too thick with your paint. Now I know that the center is dark. Typically the sunflower centers are pretty dark. I like the fact that they sometimes have a little bit of red in them, or I find that it looks neat. A little red and purple in there with some of the dark and maybe a little hint of orange in there. It definitely gives them more interest rather than just making a black center like so many people do. So I'm gradually going to just keep working this up. See, you can even hold the pastel like I'm doing right now, getting it a little darker. Also keep in mind that watercolor, again, we're using pastel like watercolor. It dries lighter typically. So it's a balance for sure. You want to make sure you don't get too dark too quickly, but it also will dry a little lighter than you're thinking. So now I do go in and add more of that orange. I got that little liner brush. You see how thin that brush is? It's a type of brush that's really good for doing little vines or little the veins that are kind of in the flowers. So I added a few of them and I was just playing. Okay, this was not even supposed to be anything serious. I thought it would be fun to try to recreate the Fibonacci spiral and do a painting over it. And again, it was a great lesson, or I hope it's a great lesson for my patrons. So, and I thought the Monet Cafe channel would really love this part, which is about using pastels to paint like watercolor. So I'm just giving the flower a little more depth, a little more vibrancy with color, and having fun. Red's a really fun, or a really orangey kind of a red is a fun color to add to sunflowers instead of just the typical yellow and brown, you know. It gives it just, I don't know, a little more pizzazz. See how I've started to lift my pastels up out of their tray? The ones yellow down there, you can see like the third yellow one up, I had added so much water that it started kind of getting into mud. So that's why I decided to kind of start lifting them up, and that really did work well. And I started to be more careful about how much water I add. Now you can see here where I used the little Derwent Ink Tints box, those little wells, I used them just like a little watercolor well that you would use. I liked this color because it's a cooler green, and I noticed the sunflower leaves were warm out in the sunshine, but they weren't just so vibrant green. When I brought them inside, I really liked that coolness that they had. I add a little warmth to it later, but I'm just, like I said, I'm just playing, having fun. And again, I'm kind of using that brush. Sometimes I let it purposely skip along that textured surface because it adds that artistic, painterly feel. And I kept playing with this. You'll see as the painting progresses. I didn't want to quit, but there's a point I'll share when I get to it that I'm like, man, I kind of wish I'd have just left it the single sunflower with the Fibonacci spiral. I'm thinking I still might go ahead and I'm going to show you an interesting little marker when we're done too that works so well with watercolor on watercolor paper. You got to watch to the end to see it, okay? So there's a little teaser to keep you guys watching. It does help my YouTube channel when you guys watch all the way through. But anyway, so I ended up doing more flowers and more background. Here's where I'm using a little bit of a darker, almost a brownish green to give the impression of, I had the sunflower literally laying down. The the stalk of it is going up to the upper right hand corner. And this is where I was saying, kind of wish I had just kept it like this, like it was laying down. I end up changing it in a minute to where it actually is more like it's growing on a stalk with other sunflowers. So I don't regret any of it because I had a good old time, you know, and you're always learning the more that you do. So I'm adding a little bit of variety in color. And but again, I like the simplicity of just the Fibonacci spiral with the sunflower. But I want you guys to play and don't get so, there's a little bit of warmer green that I'm adding. Don't get so, oh, just hard on yourself. We can do that, can't we, artists? I'm talking to myself too, you know, because I do it too. And don't compare yourself to other artists. Learn from them, but understand the people that you're probably emulating or recreating their work, they've been doing this a whole lot longer than you have. So that's where I'm using that little liner brush. You know, sunflowers have these little outer tendrils that come out sometimes from it. So again, here's where I kind of liked the simplicity of it, but I decided to use, I think this is where I decided to do a little bit of, oh, not yet. I still do a little bit on the sunflower, but I end up doing a little bit of a purpley background, and I liked it, but I think I want to do this again and just do the single sunflower. So, all right, guys, you enjoy this. I'm going to let the process of this keep going. You see what I'm doing now. I do end up, I've never done this before, but I've always heard about watercolor artists using salt to give texture, to give some interesting effects. And I used some salt in the center of my sunflower, but here's where I'm going to start adding the purple, I think. Yeah, but I don't think it was wet enough, or it could be because I don't use regular iodized salt. Is that what it's called? Like table salt. It's really bad for you. Right here I'm applying water. You'll see that I end up adding the purple to it. This is a wet on wet technique. It's going to make it just really, really loose. Okay, so I do kind of like the purple. It's kind of nice. But anyway, table salt is not good for you. I won't give you the whole scientific reasoning, but I use this salt called Himalayan pink salt, and it's so much better for you, but that's all I have. So I used it, and it didn't give the texture. It could have been because I didn't have it wet enough in the center, or it could have been because of what type of salt it was. So as you can see, the purple, I really do like the purple as a kind of a complementary color to some of these oranges and yellows that are going on. So again, kind of liked this simplicity, maybe just the flower and a little bit of the purple. I kind of liked that I got a little drip there. You see that? So I thought, I'm just going to go with it. So I get some of that purple, I take my brush, put a little water on it, and I just hit the brush on my hand, and voila, you got a little fun, abstract kind of thing going on. Now, this is the sunflower that I decided to kind of use and just keep playing and going with it. I literally just kind of traced around some of the leaves. I thought that might be fun. So I don't stick totally with that composition there of the flower, but it was kind of a neat way to do it. So play, play, play. Have fun. Paint like you're a kid again. Try this technique with the watercolor. I mean, with the pastel. I keep saying watercolor because it feels like you're using watercolor. Try it with soft pastels. Do me a favor. Let me know if you try it. Let me know of your results. And if you're a patron, if you're in our Patreon group, of course, you're going to share. My patrons share in an exclusive group that I have. Oh, I do like that turquoisey color that I added to. All right, maybe I am liking adding more. My patrons have an exclusive Patreon group in Facebook. And if you become a patron, I share the group and everything with you so you can share your work. We also have in the Patreon group where I have these albums where my patrons share their work in these albums, not in Facebook, because some people aren't on Facebook. And it's so cool because I get to see all of your work together in this neat album, and it's really fun. And I give you guys points for your homework, which leads to a prize. Every month I'm giving a prize for art supplies. most likely, typically, it'll be Dick Blick, a gift card. So every patron who participates in the homework assignments gets a chance, and the more you participate, the higher your chances are of winning the Dick Blick card each month. So it's just a lot of fun. So, obviously my patrons are watching this and they'll be doing their homework, which is cool. Now, if you're in Monet Cafe and you're not a patron, and it's only $5 a month to become a patron, I really do appreciate those who pay. There's some people who they don't even, participate in a lot of the stuff. They just pay to help this channel because I'm bringing art lessons to people everywhere, which is really cool to me. So, you can do it just to support this channel, or you can do it to kind of participate and have fun with us. We're like a neat little art family. But if you're just in Monet Cafe and your financial means aren't where you can support, or you're just too busy and you don't have time to support, you can, and many of you already have become members of the Monet Cafe art group on Facebook, because that's the art group. We just hit over 10,000 members. One of the biggest pastel art groups on Facebook. And it's loaded with people who will help you. We've got artists of every level, but what I love is the fact that it hasn't lost its sweetness. Everybody is still so kind. Advanced artists will answer your question if you're just beginning. So it's just such a great resource for you guys to grow and learn as an artist. Now, I told you I was going to ask you guys some questions. I want to ask you guys, now that I'm using pastels like watercolor is probably my second favorite medium to pastels. And, I named the channel Monet Cafe for a reason, because I didn't want to totally isolate myself to only doing pastels. And I thought Monet Cafe was kind of like a neat place. It's like a fun, free, loose, impressionistic place we can get together and learn art. I wish we could all just have coffee and paint together, but this is the online way that we do it. And I wanted the name to be broad enough to where I could introduce other mediums and mixed media. So that leads me to my question. Let me know if you like me adding in every so often a little watercolor tutorial. Even if I'm using just watercolors rather than mixed media with pastels. So are you guys okay with me not just doing pastels and introducing some other things here and there? Let me know in the comments. Also, most likely, I know I'm not gonna veer totally away from pastels. That's my love, But I would like to get your feedback if you'd like to, mix it up a bit sometimes. I think it would be fun. Plus, I think exploring other mediums only increases your art skills, abilities. When you learn how different mediums behave, you might realize, hey, I like doing a little mixed media work. Mixed media only meaning kind of what it sounds. You mix different mediums like pastel and acrylic and watercolor. I like acrylic painting too. So again, let me know. Okay, now I'm intensifying this first sunflower because it's going to be the star of the show. It's the one that's closest to us and the biggest. And the other ones I do add a little bit of fun, color to it. But the little one in the middle, that's back in the back, you, as an artist, you have the ability to create detail where you want it. And it's usually a good idea to not make everything so detailed all over the whole painting. So that's why that little guy is kind of subdued and in the background. So anyway, getting close to done, and then I'll share with you a little bit about the markers that I used. If you're doing the Fibonacci sequence combination with this painting, I'll tell you what I used to accomplish that. I love these markers. Well, I just realized it's almost at the marker section, so I'll just keep talking. I did add a little bit of depth with some darker values. This is where I said I kind of made that sunflower with the stalk. I probably made the stalk a little too wide. But I wanted to get a little bit more of the darker values and also to ground it a little bit. You'll see how I add some of a darker value down, like where the roots would be or where those stalks are going down. I also I wasn't liking that background to the upper right because that's when I had the flower laying down. I decided to make it kind of like a sky rather than the leaves I had made before. That's the neat thing. You can change things up. What I did is I actually, after I was done, again, with watercolor, you better preserve your light or you can't get it back. So because I had already made that sky in the upper right dark, I literally just got some new pastels of a light blue and a white, and I lighten it up. So when you see the final here and it looks a little lighter in the sky up there, that's how I did it. Okay, some more purple. You know, if you've watched my channels, my videos much on my channel, you know I love purple. I'm doing a little bit more of the little splatter technique, just having some fun, getting creative on a Saturday, and it was awesome. All right, so here's where I was telling you, I reinforced my Fibonacci spiral with these Posca markers. These markers are awesome for using on top of watercolor. Now, the cool thing is they have white as well as black. So I know that was a lot of information in one video, but I had a lot of fun with it, and I hope you learned something. I hope you will try using soft pastels like watercolor. Wasn't that neat? If you try it, let me know what you thought. Become a patron if you'd like, and happy painting.